Good evening and welcome to Election Night in America, 1968. In this massively important presidential election year, the Democrats and Republicans could not have put up two candidates more different. Martin Luther King Jr., the civil rights leader, has been nominated narrowly by the Democrats at their convention, winning a narrow majority of the delegates. He is the first African American to be nominated by one of the two major political parties in the United States ever. As for the Republicans, they put up a raging segregationist, George Wallace, who is a Democrat just 1 year ago. George Wallace switched parties once it became clear he could not win the Democrats' nomination. While the Democrats ran towards the left with Martin Luther King Jr., the Republicans ran with George Wallace far right. At the Democratic National Convention, it was an absolute brawl. Martin Luther King Jr., the far-left socialist and civil rights leader, was narrowly nominated on the 7th ballot at the convention. This went all the way to 7 ballots, with compromise candidates coming in and out, with candidates entering, candidates withdrawing their names. At the very end, this is the map. Martin Luther King, colored in blue on the map, won states from the West Coast to the East Coast. A very narrow majority of 1,456 delegates. That's a narrow majority, but not close behind at all was Eugene McCarthy, the Minnesota senator, also a leftist, at 557 delegates. Martin Luther King Jr. has chosen Eugene McCarthy to be his running mate in this race, a nice unity gesture for the party. Meanwhile, Hubert Humphrey, the current vice president under Lyndon B. Johnson, won 401 delegates, mostly in the South and the East. Meanwhile, George Wallace initially ran in the primaries but dropped out to join the Republicans. He won a few of his home southern states, 302 delegates, and Ed Muskie won 44 delegates. At the Republican convention, it was almost just as divided, just far less candidates. There were only 3 major candidates in this race. For the longest time, it looked like Richard Nixon, the former vice president under Eisenhower, was virtually guaranteed the nomination, winning opinion poll after opinion poll in early 1968. There was a brief moment where Michigan Governor George Romney stole the spotlight and led, but for the most part, Nixon was ahead. But this all changed when it appeared that Martin Luther King Jr. would win the Democratic nomination. And once George Wallace entered the race, the party ran with him far right. It ran far right once George Wallace entered the race. He argued that they should run far right to counter Martin Luther King Jr.'s leftism. As you can see, Wallace, of course, did the best in the South and then other eastern states. Romney in some more moderate liberal states. That's what he ran his campaign based on. And then Richard Nixon did well in the West. We now have our first poll closings of the night at 7 p.m. in a variety of states. Stand by for a major projection. And that concludes the 7 p.m. poll closings. We had projections in 4 states, 3 of which went to George Wallace, 2 deep southern states and then, of course, Indiana. Meanwhile, Martin Luther King Jr. won the state of Vermont, a state that voted heavily for Lyndon B. Johnson 4 years ago in 1964. Wallace has taken an early lead, but there's a lot to go tonight. Of course, the southern states will close first. We are expecting Wallace to do better in these early poll closings, and then Martin Luther King Jr., start to pick up ground later on in the evening. But there are many states yet to go. We will see what happens. And after another poll closing, George Wallace has only expanded his lead to 46 electoral votes. We are also noticing that John V. Lindsay, the mayor of New York City, who is running on an independent ballot line, is winning a significant portion of votes. Polls did not have him getting much attention at all, but it appears that once voters actually entered the ballot box, these more moderate, more centrist, maybe even slightly left or right leaning voters are choosing Lindsay out of spite for the far left Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the very far right Governor George Wallace. He is winning up to 5% in many states, even winning a couple of counties so far. We will see how that impacts this race. And now we have a 8 p.m. poll closing in states from Oklahoma to Maine to Pennsylvania to the crucial Illinois. And after another poll closing, George Wallace has only expanded his lead. You could clearly see that regional divide. Martin Luther King Jr. doing very well in the Northeast. He's only winning New England states so far, as well as Washington, D.C., the Democratic city, while Wallace is absolutely dominating in the South. Florida, Mississippi, his home state of Alabama, and then those border states, those states in between Missouri, Illinois, Virginia, Pennsylvania, etc., those are the ones we can't call. Those are the closest. This is very reminiscent of the years of the Civil War and the decades after, where the South, except flipped, where the South used to be heavily Democratic while the Northeast was heavily Republican. You could clearly see the party swap there, where now the more leftist, more liberal Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is winning the North, and of course the conservative Wallace in the South. We now have an 8:30 p.m. poll closing in the state of Arkansas. Here's a projection. In a major win for the Wallace campaign, they have picked up the state of Virginia, a crucial border state, very quickly into the night. That puts that, as well as Arkansas, puts Wallace, Governor Wallace, at 123 electoral votes, well ahead of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who remains stagnant at 36. The betting odds are starting to favor Wallace heavily starting right about now, given this electoral vote lead. Remember, 270 votes are needed to win. We now have our 9 p.m. poll closings in many Midwestern states mostly, but also New York, Texas, Michigan. After the 9 p.m. poll closings, we have a major update on the electoral map. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. has made up some ground, but it might not be enough to really put him close with Wallace in terms of electoral votes, but we still don't have the West Coast in where Dr. King is expected to do well. But regardless, Governor Wallace is now at 161 electoral votes, absolutely dominating in the South, but also doing very well in the traditionally Republican Midwestern states. He's clearly, continuing this trend in these Midwestern states of increasing conservatism, a move towards the Republicans, towards the right in the Midwest. He's clearly continuing that trend. These states are following that trend, even with someone as far right as Wallace. Meanwhile, Dr. King won a big victory in New York, 43 electoral votes, as well as New Jersey. That has a significant amount of electoral votes, which was expected to be at least sort of close, but Dr. King needed it to really put him anywhere close with Wallace, which he now is. 106 to 161, 270 are needed to win. It is now time for the 10 p.m. poll closings in Nevada, Montana, and Utah. And in our electoral map update, George Wallace has won a significant victory in the state of Michigan. It was called the must-win state for Dr. King, a significant portion of black voters, especially around Detroit. The King campaign was desperately trying to turn them out, but it looks like even if they did, it wasn't enough. These blue-collar voters are the voters that Wallace is trying to target the most. He's trying to turn their anger against, or turn their anger for these left-wing social movements, anti-war, racial equality, social movements that we have seen throughout the 60s. He's trying to turn that into anti-Dr. King voters, essentially. And it is working so far in these more blue-collar states, Rust Belt states, Indiana, Michigan. That is clearly working. Wallace is trying to build a coalition around traditional conservative Republicans, blue-collar workers who traditionally vote Democratic, and then swing suburban voters who are also unhappy with these social movements. Michigan, lots of suburbs around Detroit. You've got lots of blue-collar workers. He has done just that in Michigan. That is a major pickup for the Wallace campaign. It is now 110 for Dr. King and 198 for Wallace. He gets closer and closer to that magic number of 270. It is now time for the 11 p.m. poll closings on the West Coast now in 4 states. And after that 10 p.m. poll closing, Wallace has only expanded his lead once again. He is now just, get this, 13 electoral votes away from victory. Dr. King will need a miracle if he wants to be elected president. Wallace won a major win in the state of Texas, that's about 25 electoral votes, as well as Ohio, which is 26 electoral votes. That together, 51 electoral votes, just those 2 states together. Those 2 were huge. Once again, that coalition of traditional Republicans, suburbs, and blue-collar workers, that was huge in the state of Ohio. It wasn't enough, however, to break the Democratic stronghold in West Virginia. Dr. King still won those Union voters that dominate the voter bloc in West Virginia. Meanwhile, the West Coast states are returning positively so far for Dr. King. It does look like he is performing very well in the urban regions, in the cities, the urban centers on that East Coast. We will see, but again, Governor Wallace just 13 electoral votes away. It would be really difficult for Dr. King to pull off this election. It is now time for the 12 a.m. poll closings in the state of Alaska. Dr. King got exactly what he needed in that poll closing, winning the massive state of California as well as other important states like Oregon and Maryland. But will it be enough? That is the question. Governor Wallace is just 7 electoral votes away from victory. Dr. King has 185. Wallace has 263. If Wallace wins Illinois, Wisconsin, or Pennsylvania, not and, or Pennsylvania, he wins the election just like that. Any combination of 2 remaining states will win Wallace this election. He is just 7 electoral votes away from 270. And with that being said, it is now time for the 1 a.m. poll closings in Hawaii, and we have a very major projection, and that is that George Wallace, the former governor of Alabama, the Democrat just a year ago, who is now a Republican, has been elected the President of the United States in a stunning turn in history. Just as the United States was making social advances when it comes to racial equality, as well as also running to the left on economic issues, of course, President Johnson's Great Society, Medicaid, Medicare, the Civil Rights Act, the Johnson and Kennedy administrations pushed us far, far, far towards the left. America is now turning back to the far, far right, going back decades and decades in terms of social issues. George Wallace is a loud and proud segregationist, and it is just a stunning election result. Democrats took a gamble putting up Martin Luther King Jr. for president, and it clearly did not work out. Wallace of Alabama is the president. As you can see, this comes after Pennsylvania is projected to go to Wallace, but it is not just Pennsylvania, it is Illinois. The turnout in Chicago in the Chicago metropolitan area was not enough for Dr. King. The suburbs around it and the traditional Republican voters in the southern portion of the state, it was too much for Chicago to offset. Wallace wins Illinois. He wins in Wisconsin. Blue-collar workers turned out strong for George Wallace. In Colorado, George Wallace will narrowly come out on top. In New Mexico, Wallace is projected to be the winner. In Iowa, the rural regions offset the few cities. In Iowa, Wallace is the winner in Iowa. In Hawaii, meanwhile, we can project very liberal state. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is the winner there. And this is the final electoral map. Those last batch of states, of uncalled states that we could not call before, they went in a clean sweep for Governor Wallace. That makes the electoral map not even that close. 359 for George Wallace, our next president, and only 189 for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Clearly, America was ready to vote for a white supremacist before a black man. Looking at the U.S. popular vote now, George Wallace, it was a lot closer than the electoral count would indicate. A lot closer. George Wallace didn't even win a majority of votes despite a landslide in the Electoral College. He only won 48.5% of the vote, while Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. performing very well in cities like New York City, Los Angeles, San Francisco, etc. While Dr. King has won 44.9% of the vote. Meanwhile, John Lindsay, the independent, won 4.1% of the vote, a stronger showing than what was expected. Lots of suburban moderates, even left-leaning or right-leaning individuals, center-left, center-right, voted for John Lindsay. He got 4.1%. If all those votes, the vast majority of which are based off exit polls, would have been votes for the Democrat Martin Luther King Jr., if all those votes went to Dr. King, he would be elected president. And we do have some action on Twitter where Governor Wallace is thanking the nation for electing him. A really stern order here. Law and order is back. Meanwhile, Martin Luther King Jr. is accepting the election results, but he is saying that we have to stand up to President-elect Wallace. Meanwhile, John Lindsay is very regretful as of now. He is sincerely apologizing for Martin Luther King Jr. for essentially costing him the election. So thank you guys so much for watching this election night. Obviously, I just want to say this, that this would be absolutely terrifying, and as someone who is a leftist, it was very painful to make. I made this initially going into it like, oh yeah, it would actually be really close. I don't know, I'll go through the states and see who wins. And then I realized, yeah, it is the truth what I said before. In 1968, the vast majority of Americans would have voted for a raging white supremacist and essentially fascist before they voted for a black man, even, if not a black supremacist, but a black man, just like that, who, all he wanted was equality. But that is the truth. In 1968, obviously, now that would not be the case. If someone as far right as Wallace ran against a black man, whoever it may be, I do think he would lose. But this is 1968. That is what, this is an honest video. That is what the result, I think, would be. So thank you all for watching this video. Make sure to subscribe. We're trying to get to 20,000 subscribers soon. And I will see you all later.